Hello, this is Cam Bowman. I'm going to be talking a bit about using the Chrome Debugger through VS Code. The reason I like this is because you can basically edit your code directly in VS Code, and while you're doing that, you can set breakpoints, and you can set them either for events that'll happen when you're running the code and you're clicking on components and what have you. And you can also use it to set a breakpoint that'll catch the code while it's just getting started, which I've found difficult to do just in the Chrome debugger alone. I really think it beats just doing console logs, because you can see basically everything in memory at any point in time while you're going through the program. And you can hover over variables and see what exactly each variable has as you step through the program. It's really, I've found, made it a lot easier and more intuitive to debug programs. That said, it takes a little bit of setup, so I thought I'd go ahead and provide some background on how to do that. So let's go ahead and get started. So here we are in VS Code. In order to do the live debugging, we're going to need two extensions. The first one is live server. I already have it installed. You can go ahead and install it. Basically what it does is it sets up a live local server that basically every time you save or change something in your project, it'll launch a page in the web browser that'll just update the whole page anytime you change something without you having to refresh or anything. It's pretty great in general, I think, but it really helps with debugging because it gives you a straightforward server to debug with. So get that installed first off. And then the other thing you'll want to install is the Chrome Debugger extension. I already have it installed, but you can go ahead and install that. Once you have both of them installed, I would recommend just closing out of VS Code and restarting. You can reload as well, but I found doing a full restart does a better job of making sure everything's working properly. Once you have that, you should be set to get going on the debugging. You'll want to make sure you have a workspace open and saved for whatever project you're working on. Right now I have our components project that we were working on opened up. I found the debugger really helpful for working through this one. So the first thing you'll want to make sure you can do is get the live server going. So once you have that installed, you'll see this little guy down at the bottom of your screen, Go Live. All you have to do is click Go Live, and it'll go ahead and start up a server in your root folder. So this is live, so any changes you make are going to be reflected there. So that's cool, but that's not really the debugging portion. It's just something you have to do first. To do the debugging, go over to the far left and you click Debug. It'll look like this at first. It'll say no configurations unless you've tried to set this up already. You'll notice down at the bottom of the screen you'll have a debug console. Go ahead and click on that. And then, so at this point we're not really set up yet. VS Code needs you to actually set up the debugger. So it'll say, if you go over this little gear, it'll say configure fix launch.json. The launch.json is the file that'll have the configurations for the debugger that, that it'll need. So go ahead and click that. In the middle of the screen, it'll say select environment, Node.js or Chrome. Those are both options for debugging. I found Chrome to be best when you have a live web page. So go ahead and click that. And if it'll go ahead and automatically create a launch.json file for you, which is right here, which is great. You don't have to do too much to set it up. The only thing you have to do is you go down to look at the URL here, and it's going to set it up on a local server and it's saying it wants to set it up on local server 8080. You don't want that. You want it to be on your local port that you have with the live server. If you get on here, you'll see that's at 500 or 5,500. So that's all we have to change. 5,500. Go ahead and change that. Click Save. And you can go ahead and close. You'll notice now that you have this launch Chrome against localhost. So you now should be theoretically set up to debug. So let's go ahead and click that and see if it starts us off properly. Okay, so I realized that I set the wrong configuration on the port when I set up the configuration on this one, which is fine. We can just click basically on the settings icon, which brings this up. You'll notice I have a localhost 5050, but my port down here is 5,500, so that was holding it up. So I'm going to change that and go ahead and save it, and now we should be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to debugger and click debug. And it launches my window, which is what I wanted. So now nothing's going to have happened initially as far as debugging goes because we haven't told it to do anything, but we're set to start doing it. First thing I want to say is that you can, this alone is a nice thing. It's gotten us going with the debugger. So if we now if we go into Chrome and the Chrome debugger, we can open that with Control-Shift-J. We're already where we need to be in the debugger. We don't have to worry about messing around in sources. And we have, because sometimes it can be a pain to get to it really quickly. And we can just use all of the normal options we have. We just got there quickly on a live server. So now this is just looking at it in Chrome DevTools, which is great. But one issue I have is I don't find like the support for editing is as robust in the sources here. If I'm making mistakes, I find it doesn't pick it up as well, and it doesn't take care of indenting as well. And also if you make changes, you have to copy everything back into to VSCode. So I prefer using VSCode more and sort of supplementing that with developer tools. So let's continue on that from that point of view. One thing that's cool is at this point we have our page started up. We haven't even started debugging yet, but we can go up here to where we have all our like movement options in debugging, and we can click pause right from the get-go, and it's already paused. So this is just from the start. So now we could go ahead and we can basically analyze all of our variables just in like a resting state. We can see what our closure is from like I mean, it's not interesting because this is the window, so there's not really a closure, but we can see everything in the global. So this is just without having it doing anything. So it's paused right now, so we can click continue, and then it is just back to waiting for us to do something. We can click, oh, you know what? It has a little problem in it that I left in earlier, I think. So let's go ahead. We're seeing we're getting errors right here. Let's see what the reason for that is. Just a second. Okay, so basically we're getting that error when I try and run it. The tabs aren't working correctly. One thing you might notice is down here I have breakpoints. I can set those manually, which we'll get into. But one cool thing is it can just set a breakpoint whenever there's an error. So right now I've selected to basically break on any errors. So now if I go and try to run, where is it? Where's my Chrome? Looks like my page closed. Sorry about that. Just I'll go ahead and start the debugger again. Okay. So now if I try and click on something that's broken, it'll pause. See that? And it'll it's a pause in Visual Studio Code. It's telling us where to go. And it'll take us right away to where the bug was. So we don't have to go and try and track it down, and then we don't have to put a console log in to try and figure out what broke it. In this case, it's a pretty obvious thing. We can see here that this is an undefined. There's a misspelling mistake. But we can see pretty clearly, like we can see what the this context is right here. And we can see what its properties are. So this is just an object. Here's its properties. And we can see it as an element property. And so clearly that's what that was supposed to refer to. So we could go ahead and just correct that, save it. We can restart. All right. And let's see how we're doing in here. So let's see if we click. All right, so now it's working. So that's just a way, that's the error handling, which is very helpful. But I think what is also cool is we can actually set our own breakpoints. So let's go ahead and look at the deselect function. Let's say we want to dive into what's going on in deselect. So I'm going to leave a breakpoint here. If you go right to the left of the number columns here, you'll see you can leave one. And all that's doing is telling the program you want it to pause when it gets there and let you look around and see what's going on. So I'm going to leave that breakpoint there. And then I'm going to, I know deselect will fire when I click on something on one of the tabs. So I'm going to click. And you can see behind there something highlighted. That's because it did break with the breakpoint here, which is cool because now we can go ahead and see what's going on. So this is right before this function executes. This is the one we already solved, but now we can see, and we can see what it. Now that we've solved it, we can see the element indeed is a property and an object in itself. We can say. I know I was having some issues with class list and saying it was not defined, but you can look at your object and see that it does have a class list. You could also look at your object and go through its properties. Let's say it was saying the class list property is undefined. You could say, oh, this isn't here. For some reason, it doesn't have it. You can see all the properties. You can go and look at your class list specifically. You can really quickly see what those are. So if you're having issues figuring out what classes are there, you can do that pretty quickly. Let's see. I know we were also having some issues with the data set. I was anyway, figuring out how to get access to that. You can see that it's just a property data set that's on this element, and you can see that the data set has the tab property, and you could access that pretty straightforwardly. Then you could do this dot element dot data set dot tab. So it really tells you what the hierarchy is and how to get around. So yeah, that's cool. You can really just hover anywhere and see what it's defining it as at any time. So you don't have to worry about console logging, say before for something and then after it to see how it changes. You can really view it in real time. And the other way that real time works is you can step through the functions. So you can basically go one step after the other. There's the main options of that are stepping over functions and then stepping into functions. So stepping over is going to mean you're jumping from function to function, but if there's a function call that goes into something else, you won't enter it. So I'll show you what the alternative to that is real quick. So here we have a function call, right? The function is remove. So that's going to be a call to another function, and it's going to we could step into that. So that's what we're going to do. But just so you understand, if we didn't do that, if we stepped over, it wouldn't go into this function. It would just take us to this next step, to this one right here. But we want to see what it's like to step into it. So we're going to click here. Nope, looks like that was just a single element. So it just took us right here. Let's see if we can jump into that one. Yeah, so when we stepped into that, it took us to deselect. And then we can see what exactly is happening inside of it. It's pretty straightforward, but we can step. It'll give us one extra step before we leave. And then it takes us back right up here to the end of this deselect function that we were in. We can keep going, step. Now it'll say, all right, it'll basically take us to where the function was before it called deselect, right? Because deselect was called here, and now we're on the next step in the function. So we can really step through the whole thing. You could really just start this function at the beginning, this program at the beginning, and go through each step and see what was changing the whole time. So if you're having trouble visualizing things or seeing what's changing, this is a cool thing to be able to do. The other thing that's nice is the call stack. You can basically have a chronology of everything that's been called. So right now we can see we're on the update active function. So this is our highest in the call stack. But let's say we were looking at our new active, and this was coming back as undefined, and we were like, what's going on? Why is this undefined? It's throwing an error. Our function's not working. What's happening? We could say, okay, well, new active is a parameter being passed to update active. So it's already screwed up before it got into this function. So the problem isn't coming from our function, it's coming from a prior one. When that happens, you can just say, well, there's a couple things. You could say it's in the scope. So you could go look at script is sort of how they're calling scope in this, and you could go see it's coming from there. And actually in the local scope, it's showing you active there. But you could see, if you want to figure out where it's coming from, you could go and on the call stack, it'll be in reverse order of how it was called. So this is the most recent. This is the second most recent. If there were more, it'd go third, fourth, fifth, and then the first function call. But this allows us to go to the prior function call. And we can say, okay, this is what called update active, the function we were just in, right? We were just in update active. So we can jump between them. But so this one called update active, and it passed this. So if this, so we can see what this is, by the way. We don't have to worry about console logging it. But so we would say, okay, is this undefined here? And if it was being passed as undefined to update active, it would be. Then we could sort of explore, why is this undefined? What's the context here? We can just go up through all these and just see what they're doing. If there's other function calls, we can go through them. I just think it's a great way to be able to step through the function, and I find it much more helpful to debug than just console logging. I think it's a lot quicker, and one thing with console logging is you can only see what you ask for, whereas here you can see what's ever on the screen. So you might hover around pretty quickly and notice something you didn't expect to have an issue, but it does. So just hovering around can do it. And then maybe you're going through a lot of theories very quickly about what the problem is. You don't have to console log and reload every time. You can just say, well, that's not the problem, that's not the problem, that's not the problem. Is it, oh, is it something in here? Does that not have the right element that I thought it was? I don't know, it's just very helpful, thought I'd share. I know I just found out about it pretty recently and I found it to be super, super helpful. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to assist if I can. So anyway, happy coding.